Hi, my name is John Light, and I've spent over 20 years working throughout all corners of the recruiting world. Our podcast, Drowning in the Talent Pool, is a resource to help you stay afloat and get ahead of your competition. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Drowning in the Talent Pool. I'm your host, John Light, President and CEO of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I'm joined by Alex Chausovsky, who is the Director of Analysis and Consulting at the Bundy Group. And Alex, first off, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, John. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, you know what got me excited about it is Alex and I have never met, you and I have never met in person, but we've met here on video conferences and now on the podcast, but we've kind of gone back and forth, and I've followed you closely on LinkedIn, really because I enjoy, whether I agree totally or not, I enjoy your analytical capability that you showcase, how you articulate what you're saying in the marketplace. And I know that you weren't originally an economics-oriented person. So I'm hoping as we get started that you could give us a little bit of background, kind of, the pathway that brought you to where you are today. And then the rest of the conversation, Alex, now that we are post the 2024 election, I'd love to dig into your thoughts and maybe not pin you down on forecasts, what's going to happen on, say, April 5th of 2025 or something that specific, but talk about how the market's going to shift, how it's going to change. And I'm, of course, my vested interest isn't just economics in general, but what's going to happen industrially, what's going to happen in the talent market and the labor pool and so on. But take it away, Alex. Sure. Let us share with people how you got where you are today.
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate it. My career has really centered around this concept of helping people make better quality decisions using data rather than opinion or, news headlines or any of the things that are less grounded in evidence-based analysis. And so it started with market intelligence. I spent about a decade in kind of the high-end proprietary market research world, doing market sizing, market share analysis, and basically helping companies understand their available markets, where their product development needed to go, how they can capitalize on trends and everything that goes into that. So it's strategic analysis in nature. The way that I went about doing that research was I would identify an area where people wanted to know information. I would go out to the marketplace and collect data and conduct a bunch of primary interviews and then write it up in a report. And then my job was to sell the research afterwards. And I found that selling that research was made much easier if I were to go to conferences and trade shows and present kind of the top level executive findings, if you will.
Right.
And so that got me speaking at these various events. And over time, I really ramped up to a substantial amount, enough where I actually got recruited by an economic forecasting firm out of Manchester, New Hampshire, called ITR Economics. The president and owner of the company came up to me after one of my presentations. He said, "I know you're not an economist, but I can teach you the economics part. I can't teach you how to share information, the ability to communicate complex data in an easy to understand, easy to digest manner." And so I was open to the idea. So we relocated from Austin, Texas to Manchester, New Hampshire in 2015. And the rest is history. So I spent 6 years with that firm until COVID hit, which, as you can imagine, events took a beating during COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And we parted ways at that time due to business fundamental reasons. But that really opened up my purview to pursue other passions that I had. So my next stop in my career journey was a recruiting firm, much like your own, out of Chicago, Naperville, Illinois, specifically, called Miller Resource Group, a part of the MRI network. Gary Miller, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Gary, but
I'm familiar with MRI, that's for sure.
Yeah. Long-term industry expert, has been doing this for 40 years. I had a lot to learn from Gary, but I helped him basically stand up an analytics and consulting practice as part of his business. Which involved more of the same, speaking at trade shows and conferences. But this time, instead of speaking about the economy, I would talk to people about talent strategy and real ways that the labor market was shifting and the specific things, tactically speaking, that they needed to do to adapt to the changes, whether that was
Right.
remote work or compensation, competitiveness or anything related to their number one asset, right? Their people. And so I spent 2 years doing that to great success. A lot of really great insights learned about talent strategy. And then about a year and a half ago, I joined the Bundy Group, which is where I am right now, which is a boutique investment bank out of Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I'm working in the M&A landscape. So looking at, valuations and what does the market find valuable about companies.
Right.
And so all of it is around this idea of looking at data and both quantitative and qualitative trends and trying to figure out what does this mean for business and what can business leaders and decision makers do about the latest developments and the latest data. So that's how we come to talk today.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that because it reinforces two things that, number one, the conversation is with at least one of us who knows what we're talking about. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
And number two, what I find intriguing is that path, you were in different areas. I mean, you're in the M&A space, but prior to that, you're in the talent space, if you will. And prior to that, you're in this analytic economic space. So you've got, I think, the kind of broad background that's attractive to a lot of people to be able to talk with you and, how can I say, be able to talk with you and have confidence that when you articulate an idea, you can approach it from different angles. I think we have plenty of people who are specialized experts, but I think it takes a much more holistic, broader type of view, perspective to be able to recognize something and articulate it across those silos of specialization, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think my credibility comes from being able to connect the dots from various, sometimes disparate, sometimes very related ideas, and to derive from those ideas and developments, the specific actionable insights that can help business leaders. And you're right, I don't have to be very deep on any one specific subject matter, although I do have my own areas of expertise. But being able to talk about everything from macroeconomics to geopolitics to the labor market to M&A, it helps having those perspectives in being able to be both objective in my analysis and not fall victim to, the bubble thinking that so many people, unfortunately, are privy to. And to be able to communicate that information in a way that is relevant to CEOs, but also leading salespeople and HR generalists and marketing and, accounting folks. So in a way that really makes them say, oh, I can see how this applies to my life and to my business as well.
Well, let's set the context and the backdrop, landscape we're facing right now. Here we are post-election, and there's some tectonic shifts taking place. And, it's funny because I tell my children growing up, and they ask me about presidential politics. I tell people, pay very close attention. I told my kids to pay very close attention to the policies and the people that will follow whoever gets elected. Because it matters. In fact, I would think a lot of the policies and people probably impact us more day to day than whoever holds the office, whatever party's in charge. It's these individuals making decisions on, are taxes going to go up, or is it going to get more expensive to produce energy, whether it's on the hydrocarbon side or on the green side or whatever it might be. What's it about interstate transportation costs? Because that really factors into grocery bills and goods we purchase and vacations we may consider taking and so on and so forth. So kind of a 90-second overview, if you can. I don't know if anyone can press it that tightly, but I'd be curious to hear if we can. What do you see the backdrop now here as we round out 2024 and start heading in to 2025 relative to, our economic context?
Yeah, I think to start off with, to set the foundation, let's look at where we are today, which is to say that soft landing achieved. We have a record high GDP. Consumer, which is 2/3 of the overall economy, remains resilient and both willing and able to spend money. We see this in retail sales data all the time. Each month we get a new reading and they continue to outperform expectations. Overall levels of debt in the U.S. population, while increasing over time, that's very natural, right? We have a growing population. We're a credit-driven society. So it's not the overall amount of debt that we held, but rather what are delinquencies doing? So are we able to keep up with the payments on our debt? And by and large, the answer to that question is yes, we are. Now, there are some pockets of weakness, particularly when you look at credit cards and auto loans, especially within the younger generations. People are having a harder time keeping up, but nothing points to a capitulation of the consumer as we look out towards 2025. And so I believe that there's going to be further economic expansion on that side of the economy. On the industrial side, it's different, right? Since 2023, we really haven't seen any growth. In fact, we've seen mild contraction in sectors like U.S. industrial production and non-defense capital goods new orders, which is a fancy name for business-to-business spending and capital investment, right? Because the high interest rate environment stifles with expensive borrowing costs, and so a lot of projects aren't moving forward. Plus, you had the presidential election, and so there was a lot of uncertainty about that policy frontier, what's going to happen, whether it's Harris or Trump that takes the helm. And people, those are very different agendas. And so people were kind of in a wait and see posture. But I would say by and large, the economy is doing okay today, with the consumer side clearly outperforming the industrial side. As we look to the future, and now we're past the election, and there is at least policy clarity in terms of which set of policies we could potentially see enacted, we still don't have confirmation to what extent we're going to get some of the proposals through, right? Whether we're going to get just an extension of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act from 2017, basically keeping the status quo in terms of individual and corporate taxes. If we get some additional movement beyond that, President Trump has suggested cutting taxes on Social Security, on tips, on overtime. He's talked about lowering the corporate tax rate from 21%, where it is today, to 20%, and perhaps even to 15% for companies that largely manufacture in the U.S. But I think that those are kind of anchoring points for the administration. We cannot be certain about how much of that is going to get put through. Now, we can say that the likelihood of the extension of the tax cuts that are already in place is higher than any new cuts that are being proposed, because in order to get substantial tax cuts across, you have to have consensus, right? He needs congressional support. And even though there is kind of the trifecta now, we've got the GOP in control of the White House, of the Senate, and of the House. So he's likely to have more support. There's still fiscal hawks in the Republican circles that believe that we should have a balanced budget and we shouldn't spend more money than we take in revenue in terms of taxes and other government revenues. And so I think it's still very much TBD to what extent we see movement on the tax cuts. What we also see, and I think the other two key elements that I'm watching very, very closely, are what happens with immigration and what happens with tariffs, particularly in terms of we have some wide range of potential tariff policy that could be implemented, right? It's anything from 10 to 20% tariffs across the board on all of our trading partners to 60 to 200% tariffs on China. And then on the immigration side, right, we're talking about potentially deporting up to 20 million people. Although if we're being realistic with it, I think the likelihood of that happening is not very high. We are likely to see some deportations, certainly using the military, according to President Trump's latest positioning. But 20 million is a huge ask. It's just a very, very complex process. But any way you cut it, this combination of tariff and immigration cutback is going to be inflationary. And so that's one of the themes that I see as we head into 2025, is that, we are likely to see inflation and interest rates remain above the Federal Reserve's target rate. So we might hit 2% at some point, but it's going to be temporary. And I think after that, we're likely looking at probably closer to 3 to 4% inflation longer term, which means that the Fed will have to keep interest rates higher in order to keep a lid on that inflationary pressure. And so businesses need to be really careful, and they need to be thinking about it now in terms of figuring out what the impact of potential tariffs and immigration policies are going to be for them, and how will they operate successfully in a higher inflation and higher interest rate environment as we look out towards 2025.
No, I appreciate that, number one. And we covered, that's a lot of territory.
There's a lot there, a lot there.
That's a,
Yes, for 90 seconds, I think I went over, but I had to be comfortable.
that's all right. I mean, look, it's a lot. When you look at economics, I remember quite a bit, not just from college. I was very fortunate. I had an advanced accounting profit in college, who told me to read the first 8 chapters of Frederick Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. He said, if you read that, it's like getting a master's degree in economics. And frankly, it was one of the most dense books I ever read. I mean, you read 2, 3, 4 pages and you're like, I need to process this.
Yeah.
And my understanding is that's one of his easier books to read. So, I go through it and certain things stick out to me. Number one, economics is an incredibly complex topic that's so broad because it touches everything. Even things we don't think about day to day, it somehow touches and influences it.
Of course.
But I also remember that the base definition of inflation is too many dollars chasing too few goods. And, I sit back and I wonder what the balance, if the balance is ever found, going to be between the Fed policy and the administration's policies and the impact on the economy. For example, does the Fed turn around and say, hey, we need to do more quantitative easing, i.e. print more money, which by definition is going to drive inflation because you create more dollars. The question is it going to create outsized production so there are more goods for those dollars to chase, so to speak, putting it in simple terms. Plus, we're so tied in this global economy. I mean, Alex, who knows what's Europe going to do? What are countries in Asia going to do? And our import-export partners, our trade partners. I think a lot of it is hold your breath and we're going to have to find out the hard way and go through it. But I
completely agree. I completely agree. And I do think that President Trump is positioning and anchoring. And, I think he's quite adept at using the carrot and the stick, effectively. Yeah. And so I don't think that some of the more aggressive positions are going to,
fully materialize,
play out in the near term. I think that President Trump his goal, I think, is to have a vibrant economy because, to your point from earlier, the economy is such a big driver of political success. It's not politics that impacts the economy. It's the economy that impacts politics, right? So we've got, midterm elections to look forward to in 2026. We've got kind of the next big presidential election in 2028 when President Trump is no longer on the docket. And so, if the goal is to retain Republican control, they want to have a good economy at the end of all of this. And he's surrounded himself in the past with people that will give him insight into what the potential outcome of those policies is going to be. And he'll do it again. Mm-hmm. And so whether you agree with some of his picks or not, that's certainly up to your personal preference. But what I will say is we've seen some evidence that, some of the policies are justified. For example, if you look at the behavior of China when it comes to world trade, right? When you look at the behavior of some of our other trading partners, including the Europeans, there's certainly an argument to be made there that there needs to be some pushback from us in order to even the playing field a little bit. But what that looks like exactly, as you said, is still very much TBD. So I think there's going to be a lot of negotiation, a lot of trying to come together. We already see the Europeans, as an example, making moves. They showed their willingness to buy substantially larger amounts of U.S. oil and natural gas as a means of kind of equating that trade balance that's currently leaning in their favor. And I think we'll see China come out with some steps to do something similar as well, because nobody really wants a big trade war.
Yeah, and they all want to sell here. Their goods and services, they want them sold in the U.S. because of our consumerism, I think. Right. But let's chat for a second about, against this backdrop, and really the core of what I wanted to get to is, what does that mean for people? What does that mean for not just the labor pool, if I can put it the way, the talent pool, but for companies? I mean, companies with 500 or fewer employees represent 99% of all W-2 employees out there. And in the United States. And some of those companies, a large chunk of those companies, maybe a large majority even, are not necessarily driven by what's happening in the public capital markets, but by what they're getting with their regional or local banker, what they're dealing with their competitors in a certain geographic region. So my question, what I'd like to kind of dive into here, relates to, and I think you saw this article as well. I can't remember who plopped it out on LinkedIn, but one of the examples, and it might have been you, plumbing by the depths of my memory, about how when Nick Saban retired from Alabama as their head football coach, there's a direct line from his retirement to something like 423 coaching changes at the high school, college, and professional level. And the
I
point
actually
was,
think that was Eddie Beaver, not to take
it might have been, but I think we both glommed onto it because it was shocking to read. It was like, wow, what a great illustration. And Eddie does great work too.
He does.
You know, what gets me about it is it makes me wonder, do we have enough executive level volatility? Number one, because that seems to be driven by you're either not performing and you got to be replaced, or you're performing great and somebody poaches you, or you're performing great and the business is expanding and you have to hire. But the point being is what happens that level kind of filters into and directly impacts mid-level, white-collar professionals, vocational, blue-collar, the whole kit and caboodle, so to speak. So I sit back and I wonder, what does this portend for companies that need talent, how they're going to go about getting that talent, and what about the talent itself? Because the quit rates still don't seem like they're reflecting a lot of confidence in the job market from the candidate side.
Yes,
So I'd love to kind of get your view of that.
I agree wholeheartedly on the quit rate. In fact, we're below like 2018, 2019 levels at this point.
Mm-hmm.
That shows that people don't believe that they're going to be easily able to find another job, which is why they prefer to stay where they're at for the stability and the consistency, even if that means sacrificing a little bit higher pay somewhere else. They
Mm-hmm.
like the comfort zone, and you see that in the quit rate. So I think the issue of not enough movement at like the management level stuff, to me, is offset by the fact that we do have a substantial amount of new business formation, right? So if you look at the applications filed with the Small Business Administration, we are still operating at levels way beyond pre-pandemic. People are taking more risks. They're starting new businesses, and those businesses are looking to hire people. So the labor shortage that we have been experiencing, I think,
Mm-hmm.
is not in the rearview mirror. It's not as acute as it was, let's say, in 2021 or 2022, but there is a mismatch in this country between the amount of people available and willing to do the kind of work that needs to be done and the demand, right? The supply and demand are
Mm-hmm.
not aligned. And I think that that's going to be a longer term issue for us, particularly exacerbated by the fact that the kind of workers that we're churning out as a nation are not
Mm-hmm.
the kind of workers that we need. And so some evidence to back that up, of the top 10 positions that are currently, advertised as being open, 9 of the 10 do not require a college degree. They're, food services, they're healthcare, kind of home
Mm-hmm.
care people, they're, people in the construction industry, for example, and agriculture. These are jobs that are not seen as desirable, certainly by the younger generation, which wants to go to college and get a degree and get an office job with, comfortable perks. They don't want to have the blue collar, heavily physical kind of hourly type of work, which is what we
Mm-hmm.
need. So I think it's a combination of factors. Not enough people to do all the work that needs to be done is number one. Number two, a misalignment of the kind of people that we have versus the kind of jobs that we need filled. And so in certain industries, in industrial space, for example, tech jobs and sales jobs right now, very hard to find. Field
Right.
service technicians, right? Certain types of engineers, I mean, they can still pretty much name their price as long as it's within reason, and companies will snap them up because those are the positions that there's a huge shortage of supply relative to the demand that exists out there. So when I talk about the labor market, I try to have a more nuanced approach to the specific kinds of roles and the specific
Mm-hmm.
locations, because it's almost unproductive to talk about it nationwide because it masks a lot of these very unique situations that exist at the position level and at the location level as well.
Let me be selfish.
Sure.
Since it pertains to my business.
It's your podcast.
But let me be selfish with this. What about executives and white collar professionals? So let's talk about the professional engineer, the CPA, the software developer, the mid-level manager for manufacturing or hospitality, whatever it might be. Let's talk about the professionals where you're going to require, someone who's got specific experience, specific technical knowledge, or specific certification. I've noticed, like CPAs, for example, they have an extremely low unemployment rate.
Yeah.
Extremely. So obviously it's a competitive space for talent acquisition. I'm curious about when you think about kind of the concept of the war for talent. Some people might say it's the war on talent with the way they feel ghosted by companies and whatnot, but let's call it the war for talent. And what can companies do to mitigate from the perspective of, okay, let's presume, right, wrong, or indifferent, however, whatever the differential is, let's presume that talent is in short supply for that whole space. How should companies position themselves or look forward into the year? For example, should companies consider being more opportunistic in their hiring strategy versus we're going to do it this way and we're going to launch it and we're going to take 90 to 180 days to fill this accounting manager or this engineering director or this VP role or whatever it might be, which is what companies tend to do. They tend to look at the budget and they tend to go, okay, well, we're going to do this. It's going to go through layers of people signing off and approving this and approving that. And then frankly, the talent acquisition systems out there are broken. They're from the 60s, last century. And they're not very efficient, even with technology today. But what's a company to do that needs, in order to expand and grow, needs that level of talent?
Yeah. So much to unpack in that question. I mean, first of all, I fully agree with you that the devil's in the details in terms of the positions. You talked about accountants. I mentioned installation and maintenance and repair folks, 1.8% unemployment rate. Architecture engineering has 1.7%. Mid-level management is at 2% right now. So, very, very different depending on the position. We're certainly not producing enough people with accounting degrees in this country relative to the need that exists. And I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to go into accounting because they know that that's one of the areas where AI is going to be so influential, right? If it's a very process-based job, then, it's ripe for disruption from development of AI. But to answer your question about what companies need to do, I think breaking the mold and thinking that there is a template that it can be equally applied to all of their positions, it is number one, right? You've got to recognize that things have evolved. Not all positions are the same, nor is the availability of talent that exists for those roles. And so you've got to really challenge yourself to say, if I'm literally looking to add people and I know that my business depends on it in these positions, then I've got to be efficient in my process, right? I can't go, more than one or two interviews before I give a person real indication that I'm interested in having them join the company, right? I can't stretch it out into, I need you to talk to Bob, and now I need you to talk to Steve, and now I need you to talk to Sally, right? Like, get them all in the same room, have them talk to the same person, provide feedback immediately, and be more efficient, be much more communicative. Most companies are terrible at this. But one of the things that we've seen is the touch point, right? You've got to have at least a touch point a week. And that means a text message, a LinkedIn message, an email, a phone call, something to say, you're still very much in the running. We're going through our process. Please, stay with us and communicate. So those are two very clear operational things. On the sidelines of that, and this is important both from an attraction and a retention perspective, you've got to be competitive with the wages, right? Wages continue to go up over the last 12 months. 4% is the average wage growth in the United States. And so if your cost of living adjustments for your people are 2%, then you're falling behind, and your people are falling behind, right? You're losing people. So being competitive from that perspective, And then I think it's also really, really important to be transparent with people and to understand what motivates them. So what I mean by that, as especially when I was with Gary Miller's outfit, the Miller Resource Group, one of the things that MRI Network does really well is they use something called a clamps profile. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's basically a very simple survey where you're asking people what are their priorities. Do you care more about salary or the challenge of the job or advancement opportunities or commute or whatever it is, right? And then you share that information with the interviewing person so they can tailor the conversation to the things that the individual cares the most about. So ask the question and then adapt to that particular individual rather than having this templated process. I think if companies want to be serious about bringing on that talent, they got to rise head and shoulders above their competition, or else they're going to lose. It's that simple.
Yeah, at least compete on a level field.
Correct.
One of the big things we've seen candidates pull the ripcord on and self-select out of the process is that it's not hybrid enough or it's not remote. And I read a study in July that said in July of 24, there was actually a larger part of the labor force, the talent pool, was working remotely than in July of 23. And it kind of surprised me because everybody's about return to office. Let's get in here and use this real estate. Let's do this. And it's done and da, 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 da. And I think either end of that spectrum has legit concerns, legit input in terms of what would work best, what does and doesn't work best. The challenge I see with it is that it makes your interested talent pool less available. I believe that interest drives availability.
Yes.
If there's an extremely attractive opportunity and it's just, man, this is what I want. This is my career path. I connect with the people. This is something I want to be a part of. Availability becomes almost a secondary question. You're going to be available except in extreme circumstances, or a family issue, whatever it might be, which leads me to kind of package this together. I'm working on 2 or 3 roles right now where the right talent is not local. And these are specialized positions, very technical. Companies, I think, need to do a couple of things. Number one, you got to either be open to the remote piece, a little more flexibility in that, or how do you relocate people when the housing market doesn't know its right hand from the left hand at the moment? Interest rates are high. If you have a 2.5% rate on your mortgage today, number one, can you sell it to somebody who's going to have 7% rate? Are you happy to get into a 7% rate?
Right.
But number two, talking about cost of living increases and 2% versus 4%, I've always wondered, and maybe you have insight to this, when they look at, okay, wages increased 4%, is that strictly from people getting raises, or is that inclusive of people making a move in part because, holy cow, if I don't get a 20% uplift, I can't afford my family's lifestyle anymore. And I say it family lifestyle, Alex, because through the past 5 years, when you think, okay, we hit 2020, we have the COVID lockdowns, we have this incredibly fast evolution of work and how we do work. And not only have lifestyles changed largely in the country, but companies, I think, have gone from one extreme to another. Last half of 2020 and going into 2021 and 22, they were hiring like gangbusters. And all of a sudden there's this massive contraction. A year and a half of layoffs in tech, layoffs in other industry sectors, flat hiring, less than desirable job creation in terms of balance across industry sectors. If the government's doing the bulk of the new job creation, new hiring, that's a problem.
Agreed.
Agreed. So how do companies navigate that while maintaining their strategy and their culture in a way that helps their business expand? Because to your point, people want to maintain their lifestyles. When I went through family health issues with my children, and one of my primary goals wasn't so much, hey, can I take the business I was running at the time and scale it to some massive enterprise? It was, how do I give them the normalcy while we're dealing with this issue with cancer in a family? I think that looms large in a lot of people's minds.
It does.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that and how that impacts this, because we've gone through so much change. I think people are getting whiplash.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a few things in your question that I wanted to address. First, on the 4% versus the 2%, I'll reference some data from ADP. So ADP, obviously being one of the largest payroll processing companies, they have a great amount of data. They see people's W-2 earnings every single month, and they actually distinguish. They have a great set of statistics about the average increases in salary for people staying in their jobs versus moving to other jobs. So what we saw at the peak of the kind of the post-pandemic rebound was that there's on average at the time was 8% increases for people staying and over 16% for people shifting jobs.
Over 2x.
So more than 2x. Right now, that delta has closed substantially. There's still a little bit of a premium, but the current numbers say for job stayers, it's 4.6%. For job switchers, it's 6.2%. So, not a significant premium to jump ship and go somewhere else on average, I would say. So that leads me into the broader answer to your question. I think that the problem that many companies are running into is, once again, they're trying to take a template and apply it to their entire workforce. And that just doesn't make any sense, because what we see is a stratification of labor along 3 different channels, right? You've got about 55 to 60% of all labor that needs to be present on location, physically in the office to do the job. And this includes, construction, it includes manufacturing on the production line. It looks at all of the service industries, right? Then we've got another contingent that's about 20%, 25%, maybe at the upper scale, that is hybrid. So these are folks that can be remote for a couple of days a week, but they also do much better when they're in the office a couple of days a week, whether that's 2 or 3, or 4, that's TBD, right? But this group that, really does see some benefits from being back in the office, at least part-time. And then you've got the remaining 15 to 20% are people that can be fully remote 100% of the time without any impact to their productivity or effectiveness. And most companies that say we have a 100% return to the office mandate, they're missing the nuance of this entire stratification. Like, not all of your people have to be back in the office. Some do. And you have to provide some incentive for those guys to come back to the office. But don't force it upon everyone, even though they don't have to be back in the office to be productive. So I think that companies that recognize this and address the disparity between those 3 strata head on are going to be much more successful. Now, it requires very much transparent and direct conversations with their employees. It requires listening to people griping about, well, it's not fair that these guys get to do this, and explaining to them exactly why they're able to do that and you're not. And, treat people as adults. Don't treat them with kid gloves, right? So I've seen best-in-class companies very effectively manage this process by putting in benefits and perks for people that are back to the office full-time, including things that are less tangible, not official company policy. For instance, if they can't pay more to people to do that, then they'll offer a few days of off-the-books PTO, as long as it's, approved by your manager, that your work is covered and that there's no disruption to company productivity. They're saying, we're not going to change our policy in terms of PTO, but we are going to create some room for flexibility for you and your direct manager to bake some of that in. And so I think it's things like that I've seen be very effective in addressing the disparity between the kind of jobs that exist and their individual requirements to be back in the office or to be remote.
I think you're onto something with the stratification and the fact that it is hard for a big company. I mean, let's be frank. And I'm just talking mid-level and upper-level white-collar professionals now. You start talking vocational, hands-on people, assembly lines, manufacturing specialists, this sort of thing. You can't treat everybody the same template, in the sense that not everyone's the same. One thing I learned from reading Hyatt, it was very, very clear, and how he looked at things, is that each individual has their own motivations, their own priorities for every decision they make. And it could be something as mundane as, do you prefer 2-ply or 1-ply? Do you like Kleenex with aloe or the plain stuff? I mean, everybody's got an opinion. It's like the old saw that we sit there and debate: should the TP come off the front or off underneath? Well, there's
Fair
actually
enough.
an answer to that. If you look at the original patent drawings, it comes off the front. But who am I to debate, right? I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
we're an off the front kind of house as well. In fact, I've had many a conversation with my kids about why it's less efficient to have it the other way around. But they just don't seem to care as much.
Let me ask you one other question here before we wrap up, because we've gone probably longer than we planned in a way, but I think there's a lot of great content here, a lot of great insights for people to listen in on and hopefully explore more. And I know anybody watching this on our YouTube channel or watching the audio and video together, you're easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. I'm an open networker for the most part. We'll connect with most anyone. I would encourage everybody who listens to this to have a chance. You're one of the people I look for your posts.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Because again, whether I agree or understand every point is secondary to the fact that I want to get as much information as I reasonably can without being overly, say, OCD and just getting so much that I don't do anything, but enough to where I can make a cogent decision on, hey, what's tomorrow going to look like? What industry sectors do we need to be considering placing our focus in? How do we need to approach a candidate so that we put the best foot forward on behalf of a client? And how do we approach a client so we're putting the best foot forward on behalf of the candidate? Because I don't look at the recruiting process from my perspective as having a dog in the hunt in terms of I have to lever a candidate into a spot or lever a client toward a candidate. I look at it as if this gets too complicated, then it's not the right fit, and I'm focused on delivery. But that's a mindset you don't see in medium enterprises, large enterprises, the super humongoid enterprises, right? It's more about, okay, this is what we are, and this is how it's going to be. If you want to work here, you want us in your resume, it's X. Versus, hey, look, we're going to let you be your individual self so long as you hit your numbers or nail your goals, your milestones, whatever it might be. I'm curious if there's one thing you think a company ought to consider evolving or improving so as to make them more efficient. Let me qualify that, to make them more effective in acquiring the right talent. What would it be?
Yeah, it's something that I spent a great deal of time contemplating. And the conclusion that I came to is it has very much to do with this point that you raised earlier, whereas there's two mentalities in approaching labor. There's the I'm the boss and you're the employee. And so I'm going to project power down. I'm going to tell you exactly what's going to happen, whether you like it or not, because I'm the boss of you. And that situation, I think more often than not, and especially since the pandemic, is less and less effective. What is increasingly effective are companies that treat their employees as partners. And what I mean by that is they say, okay, we're the company and you're the employee, and we tell you what we need from you in order for us to be effective in obtaining our targets and goals and growing the business. But at the same time, we're willing to listen to what you need from us because we're partners afterwards. So if you tell us you need more compensation because you're not able to keep up with the cost of living, if you tell us you need more flexibility of schedule, if you tell us you need an alternate working hours or whatever it might be, we cannot promise that we're going to give you exactly what you're asking for, but we do promise that we will listen, we will take it under serious consideration, and we will give you a response with plenty of reasoning and backing it up. We're not just going to say flat out no because we don't want to, right? And so it's that partnership that I see as the key to not only much more stickier engagement from your employees in terms of retention and things like that, but it helps through word of mouth spread, right? I mean, if you have people that feel like they're partners in an organization, they will shout that message from the rooftops to other folks that are going to want to be a part of an organization like that. So if I were to point to one thing, I would say it's treat your employees as partners rather than subordinates. And if you're able to do that and establish this, dynamic of equal power, we rely on you as much as you rely on us, then you're going to see much better results.
Awesome. Alex, Chausovsky, thank you very much for joining us today, for your insights. And I'd reiterate, if people want to find you, they can find you at the Bundy Group. They can find you on LinkedIn. And I would encourage folks to definitely follow the content you put out, listen to learn, because I think you have some great insights. And I really appreciate your time today.
It was a blast. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Drowning in the Talent Pool. This podcast is sponsored by Sabretooth. Sabretooth improves the quality of hire and speeds up the time to fill specialized machine learning, data engineering, data science, and developer roles, stretching tech recruiting budgets further by bringing the precision of retained search and the speed of contingent search to the market in one complete solution. Find out more at sbr2th.com and follow me, John Light, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.